That's what we're focusing on at this moment. The amendment of the Victims of Gunshot Act 2017. I mean, you've seen pictures of two young men that passed on as a result of issues surrounding that. But, I mean, there are two of a lot of others, and this has been something we have talked about time and again. There's also the National Health Act that is also being looked into, talking about funding. And this morning we are being joined on the program by two gentlemen. Professor Innocent Ujai is the president of the Nigerian Medical Association. He joins us via Zoom. We're also being joined by Mr. Femi Aborisade, founding member NCP, who's also a human rights lawyer. He joins us via Zoom as well from Ibadan. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us on the program. I'd like to begin with Professor Uja. We'll get into this amendment, this process, what it means to you, what has happened in the past. We'll also come to Mr. Aborisade. But first, I'd like to ask Professor Uja. I mean, the health sector is a sector that we've seen, we've talked about in recent times, time and again, especially with that strike. And I imagine that you're relieved to see that resident doctors are back at work. Just as a starter, I mean, to give us your opening comments, what is this to you? What exactly played out? Because I call the NMA giving a 21-day ultimatum. That elapsed, by the way, before this strike was called off. That's for Professor Uja. So first, can you let us know what went into the whole deliberations such that the resident doctors are now back at work? And what happened to that 21-day ultimatum that the NMA gave? Okay, I understand that we're yet to get Professor Uja, but let me go back to Mr. Aborisade. Guess we'll just jump right into this Victims of Gunshot Act amendment. Just how big of a challenge was this, or is this? Because not everybody has been in the position of trying to get access to health care when they've been shot or when they've been injured and they're in precarious situation. If you could just give us a background, because I know you've been involved with this. How much of a challenge is this?
Well, the issue of the treatment of gunshot victims remains a challenge. It has been a challenge and it remains a challenge. It remains a challenge because hospitals would not treat gunshot victims without police report. And that has created problems, such that even people who might not have been criminals might be neglected. So that remains a big challenge. Then came the compulsory treatment of gunshot Victims Act, which provides that without any police report, any police clearance, without any monetary deposit, it is compulsory for hospitals to treat victims of gunshot. It is also compulsory for any citizen to render an assistance. And an offense under the Act, failure to treat a victim of gunshot and failure to render necessary assistance has now been criminalized under the Act. However, in my own opinion, the legislation remains a worthless piece of legislation to the extent that no funding is provided. How would you, for example, expect the private sector to obey a law that makes it compulsory for them to treat victims of gunshots? I mean, whether or not they pay a deposit. Even public hospitals are poorly funded. The series of strikes we have witnessed in the health sector by Johesu, by the NAD, the doctors organized under NAD, which strike has just been called off recently. All of this show the poor funding of the health sector. Therefore, without proper funding of the health sector, that legislation, in my opinion, remains a worthless piece of legislation. And I think that our legislators are merely begging the issue. The fundamental challenge is to bring that act. The fundamental challenge is to give effect to Section 17, 3D of the Constitution, which provides that government shall direct its policy towards providing adequate medical and health care for all persons, not just for Nigerians, but for all persons. For that to be given effect to, there will be a need, in my opinion, to criminalize medical tourism. Because unless and until it is criminalized to go abroad for medical treatment, our rulers will continue to neglect the medical sector. Therefore, our legislators should go beyond the scope of the act as it is today, which provides that you don't need to deposit money before you are treated. You don't need to have police clearance before hospitals attend to you. Where hospitals remain poorly funded.
Mr. Aborisade, quite a number of issues. So quite a number of issues you have unpacked here. I mean, this conversation started from that compulsory treatment and care of gunshot victims 2017, the amendment, which is meant to ensure that they get care even without police report. But you have indeed taken this holistically, which is understandable. I mean, referencing the health sector, the decay and all that. And from what I hear from you, you are saying that this amendment, which has been commended largely, is not even enough to get us to start solving the problems of even gunshot victims to begin with. You think that perhaps another legislation should come up instead of this that treats the health sector in general, for example, criminalizes medical tourism, ensures that every Nigerian gets access to health. Is that what you're saying, that this is not the legislation we should be looking at? We should be looking at another legislation entirely. If yes, then which one?
Yes, we should be looking towards giving effect to the constitutional provision that provides that health care shall be given to all persons in Nigeria. We should note it. Section 17(3)(d) does not even provide for adequate medical treatment or medical care for Nigerians. It is for all persons. Therefore, if that section of the Constitution is given effect to, you may not even need the act being discussed currently. But let us take it that gradually our rulers want to pay attention to the health needs of Nigerians. If they want to do that, I'm arguing that they cannot adequately do that without criminalizing medical tourism. It is because they have an opportunity to go abroad for medical tourism that they have allowed the health sector to collapse. Doctors were on strike for over 2 months. They were ignored. They would not have been ignored if they also do not have any discretion but to seek medical treatment for whatever ailment in the country.
So, Mr. Aborisade, I just wonder.
Given effect to,
I just wonder what section of the Constitution will back that particular, consideration that you have proposed. But these are some of the issues we'll unpack when we return from this break. Don't forget, we still have Professor Uja joining us on this to give us the medical perspective. How has this lasted for this long? What kind of considerations do medical personnel put in place when they are treating gunshot wounds? And don't forget the big talk about the health sector in Nigeria at large. Stay with us. Compulsory treatment of gunshot victims and the health sector in Nigeria is still our focus on the program. Mr. Femi Aborisade has been sharing his thoughts with us on the legal angle, the human rights angle. And just joining us as well is Professor Innocent Uja, who is the NMA president. Thank you for joining us as well. So let me bring this to you, because, I mean, the way the conversation has been going the past few days, in fact, ever since, you know, reports of people that were killed as a result of not being attended to by health professionals who say we need to see a police report. Ever since that came out, there's always been that, you know, finger pointed at health professionals saying, why would you do that? Aren't you meant to care for the victim first, save the life before you, I mean, ask for other questions? So what considerations really come into play for doctors, nurses, generally healthcare workers, when you're faced with a gunshot victim, for example? Is it default to ask for a police report, or what?
Well, thank you very much, Kelu. Before I start, I want to say that I'm the happiest person in this country at the moment, being that a Nigerian, Dr. Enabulele, have been elected as the president of World Medical Association. And it's a contestation of the fact that Nigeria is reckoned with internationally, and the Nigerian Medical Association has played its role in medical and healthcare worldwide. So I congratulate Dr. Enabulele, who is currently the president of Commonwealth Medical Association. Having said that, let's go to the substance of the case. The reality is that as doctors, we do not need anybody to give us any reports before, or police report, before we treat a patient. In an emergency situation, you don't ask for anything. You don't ask, all you do, in fact, even then, but particularly a patient that is unconscious, what you're interested is to ensure that you save the life of the person involved. Unfortunately, the law enforcement agencies in this country have lost their bearing in terms of control. They have no business asking us to make sure that we get police report before we treat emergency situations. Emergency situations are such that if you don't intervene, the patient will die. And by our training, we are to treat anybody, irrespective of tribe, race, political leaning, gender, and the rest, without asking for any police report. However, the Nigerian police should be educated on the role of the medical doctor. A medical doctor does not require anybody to give any permission before he attends to emergencies. We don't even ask for fees. You must treat, first of all, get the patient alive and before you think about fees. So by and large, the Nigerian Medical Association clearly knows that nobody should seek for permission from any police person before he treats any case of emergency, be it gunshot, be it severe cholera, whatever it is, whatever is brought to a doctor, he does not require to have a police report before he or she treats emergency circumstances, emergency situations, because emergency situation calls for emergency action. Otherwise, the patient will die, and that is not our training. We have to keep our patients alive and well. And therefore, it is not appropriate. In fact, when they talk about law, I feel very uncomfortable because there is no law that prevents a medical doctor from treating anybody at all. There's no law that I know. That if a patient comes, you must seek either a legal opinion or a police report before you treat such patients. That runs counter to our Hippocratic oath. So by and large, I'm saying that a doctor does not require a police report before he or she treats. But the reality on ground is that when you do that, you might be an accomplice. They might say that you are even a hobnobbing or a hiding or in complicity with a gunshot, particularly in cases of armed robbery, kidnapping, and the rest. So that creates fear, that creates uncertainty, that creates insecurity for the doctor. And probably that is the reason why some doctors ask for a police report. But by and large, there is no law that says that a doctor must seek for a police report before he or she treats an emergency.
Okay, now perhaps there is then a need for us to have a kind of background as to why it became necessary for doctors or hospitals to ask for a police report before treating anyone in the first place. Otherwise, you are saying essentially there is no basis for the law that is being reviewed to have been enacted in the first place in 2017. So if you can give us an understanding that many people may not have as to what necessitated this. You have referenced it by saying that sometimes the police, kind of makes this compulsory. But then if there is a background to this that you can give people so that they understand, as to why is it that hospitals ask for police report even though there is a law that empowers them?
Well, again, the truth of the matter is that asking for police report is totally unnecessary. I have said that before, because there's no law that prevents a doctor from seeing a patient, whether in emergency circumstance or even in routine circumstances. However, I think probably is over zealousness of the police that when you treat such cases, they might say that you are in complicity, particularly in cases of gunshot wounds, of armed robbers and the rest. So obviously the doctor is not safe, and the doctor needs to be protected, and he or she needs to protect himself. I think that's the genesis. Otherwise, as a student of medical student, which I've been, I was a medical student over 40 years ago, and there was nothing about law treating. In fact, as soon as a patient comes in, you start treating. In emergency situations, you may not even need to ask for the name of the patient. You start treating, just get over the emergency situation, and then you begin to ask details of who the patient is, where the addresses are, what are the circumstances of the injury that he or she has sustained. But doing that in Nigeria is a big problem, because the police will come in and say you are in complicity with the armed robbers. You are treating a patient. You don't know whether it's an armed robber, because you don't have evidence that even if it's an armed robber, I can tell you that even if it's an armed robber, a doctor is compelled to treat to save the life before the police will take over the case. Okay. So I don't know the origin of that, but the reality is that doctors have been harassed. Doctors have been, some of them have been killed in the process of saving lives, because the police will insist that if you don't, or in fact, some of them are locked up, saying that they are even armed robbers themselves. And that again shows that we must sanitize our security system, because the doctor has no boundary as to who to treat in any circumstance. I do not know. As a doctor, as a medical student, there was no aspect of our training.
Just 1 second, Prof. This begs just one question who then should enforce that law? I asked because in most cases, whenever there is any wound, any emergency, people just take the wounded person around them to the hospital, whether there is a policeman there or not. So if the person, it just so happens that they take this gunshot wounded person to a hospital, and who then should enforce the law? The policeman is not there. And most cases, we've had situations, of course, that's in general, public sphere, where the hospitals will say, without a police report, we will not treat this fellow, even though there is no policeman there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. We don't need a policeman to treat.
No, but the question then, who then should enforce the law? Who should enforce that law if the policeman is not there?
Which law?
The 2017 law that has been amended.
What I'm saying is that it's just a waste of exercise. You see, there should be no law to begin with to prevent a doctor from seeing a patient. This is the truth. What we are doing in fact, it violates fundamental human rights. Apart from the fact that the doctor has the right to treat anybody, whether it's an armed robber or it's a thief or whatever, even if it's an enemy. Look, if you get through our Hippocratic oath, you must treat every patient that comes to you. So the issue of waiting for police does not arise. But I have also said that doctors have suffered enormously, you know, in a circumstance where they treat these patients, particularly when it's an armed robber or a thief, and you do not know who a thief is. What you know is that a patient is brought before you, and you are obligated to treat such a patient. Okay, and if you have to treat such a patient,
Professor Oja, two things, a couple of things come up here. Pardon me to jump in. First is there a role for medical and dental council when such patients go before the hospitals and they are not treated? Is there a role for them?
Yes, of course. Such a patient should make a report to medical and dental council. If it's denied, genuinely denied treatment, he should make his case before the medical and dental council. Secondly, and such a doctor will be brought before the medical and dental council through IP, and then, of course, the disciplinary tribunal.
In addition to that, I mean, you talked about how doctors ought not to, because they make those calls that are non-medical calls. They should stick to the medical calls, which is within their purview and professional competence. Now, they also spoke about the Senate now. You should treat a patient and not ask them to deposit any amount of, or certain amount of money before they even have a look at you. That's what is being talked about now. But these days, you get to hospital to tell you, no, you have to go and deposit a certain amount of money first before we even consider you, whether you are at the point of death or not. That is, those are the accounts that we have had severally and still keep having. What is the position on that for the enemy?
Well, Chamberlain, the National Health Act provides 5% of the 1% of funds, the fund allocated for emergencies. But the question you and I will ask is that how much of that fund has been deployed? A situation where doctors in the hospital, as you all know, most of the clinical services are out-of-pocket expenses. We've talked about compulsory national health insurance scheme. These are some of the things that will be there that should protect the patients. And we are working towards universal health coverage, where lack of money should not be a factor for treatment. But in reality, is that the National Health Act has not been fully implemented. The 5% of the 1% fund that is allocated for treatment of our primary health care treatment and the rest, they have not been released for use. So obviously, the doctor in a private practice has to survive. The doctor in private practice needs to buy consumables. The doctor in private practice needs to pay the workers. However, in circumstances that the patient is in their need of treatment, I would want to plead with our colleagues to treat such patients. And unfortunately, when doctors do that and they say, well, if you don't pay, you cannot be discharged. They say the doctors are imprisoning the patients. So it is neither here or there. It's a very difficult situation in Nigeria. What we can do to overcome some of this is the National Health Insurance Scheme. If we have the fact that we have compulsory National Health Insurance Scheme for all adult Nigerians, you find that many of these problems will be sorted out because insurance will take care of it. That's what happens in developed countries, in places where health system operates. We are talking about challenges of healthcare financing in this country.
Absolutely.
It's a very serious problem.
Well, Prof,
and
when you talked about pleading, with your colleagues and the rest, I recall during the strike, successive strikes, people pled and said, we're pleading, please shelve the strike. Pleading, they'll tell you, doesn't put food on our table. We need this money. And you have referenced that they need to buy consumables, they need to pay workers and the rest, which is why it's important to have perhaps some funds set aside, which I believe this amendment is meant to tackle. But let's take this back to Mr. Aborisade regarding, where this came from in the first place. I recall, I think it was Senator Oluremi Tinubu speaking on the floor, saying that perhaps it's a misinterpretation of the Robbery and Firearms Special Provision Act. And in Section 4 says that a person convicted of an offense under subsections 1 and 3, which was earlier stated of this section, shall be liable in the case of a hospital or a clinic, that's the B part, to a fine, and it goes on and on, or the hospital or clinic shall be closed down. So perhaps that's where this came from, but it clearly says that a person convicted of an offense. Do you think this is enough reason for, hospitals or clinics to keep asking for this police report?
Well, as the Prof has pointed out, and as you have also read out clearly, there is no law that provides for the police report. However, I think that the legislators are trying to react to the reality of our experiences in which police reports are being required. And the doctors, the hospitals are trying to save their skin because they are required, if they treat any gunshot victim, to report to the police. And they are afraid if they should go ahead to report to the police, as Prof has pointed out, they may be regarded as an accomplice. So, in order to save their own skin, therefore, they seek to ask the victim or the families of the victims to provide police report before they begin treatment. Under the act you read out, the Robbery and Firearms Provision Act that you read out, they are required. Doctors or hospitals who treat gunshot victims are required to report immediately to the police. So I think the law was trying to react to the reality of our existence in terms of the harassment they may have or they have been facing from.
Yeah, sorry, I think this also puts the police in bad light. I mean, it sounds as though the police wants victims of gunshot wounds who are indeed criminals to die without getting health care, because if the law says if they're armed robbers or what, they need to even still present, I mean, it puts the police in bad light, and it would be good to get the police to actually clear this out as well, because clearly it's a big challenge. But from what we have seen so far, so there's asking of police reports, there's asking of deposit, financial deposit before a person is treated. There should be a deposit, and that's the financial angle. But a third one, which I'd like you to touch on, is people that help gunshot victims or accident victims, that help them to the hospital. There's always hesitancy now on the part of people thinking, well, if I help, I don't know what might happen eventually. Perhaps the case might turn around and the person might be termed an accomplice as well. That is something I've seen time and again. Is there any provision as well in law, since we're making it bare, that covers that or that protects them? Because they always say, be your brother's keeper, be the help, the good Samaritan. But people clearly are withdrawing these days because of their experiences. So what protects them under the law?
Yes, the compulsory treatment and care for victims of gunshot act has actually protected citizens who help victims. They are protected against any embarrassing or undue questioning by the police. So they are protected. And the challenge that we face, therefore, is to create awareness of the provisions of this act, though I argue it is grossly inadequate, but there is no awareness on the part of hospitals, on the part of citizens about the protection under the Act. The Act has protected people who provide help. And in fact, it criminalizes refusal to help. So it's important we create that awareness so that doctors, hospitals would no longer be under any illusion that they need police report before they commence treatment. The critical issue is in terms of deposit. The Act also provides that you don't need to make any monetary deposit. You are entitled to be treated. But that is worthless in the context in which the public health sector is poorly funded, as we have seen with the series of strikes by NAD and Johesu and other health workers. It is poorly funded, not to talk of private hospitals.
If I could just ask you this, well, yes, we get the point you're making.
Government will be prepared.
If I could just put this in, yeah, we get the point you're making about funding the healthcare sector, because if those funds are not there, then the hospitals should just leave them, you know, they might just be strangulated. But doesn't this, how do we then ensure that those patients who can pay are not lumped up or painted with the same brush? Because when you come up with emergencies and they tell you, well, go and do all that payment before we attend to you, people can, for those who can clearly pay, they say, look, you're just eating up our valuable time within which you can save this patient. And in some of those cases, the patients end up dying while they could still have paid if they had attended to them early.
Well, I think that the question of making deposit compulsory will be on the basis of the assessment by the hospital or the doctor of the victim to be treated. If a well-known person like you, approaches, I do not pray you are in that situation. The hospital, any doctor in Nigeria will know that no, Chamberlain can pay.
Whoa, don't give them ideas now, Mr. Aborisade. Let's go easy.
So I think it's on the basis of the assessment by the hospitals or the doctor or the victim they are confronting. But the act, the Compulsory Treatment and Care for Gunshot Victims Act, already provides that you do not need to make any monetary deposit. It is compulsory for you to be treated. But the question is, where government is failing to provide the fund, that legislation will remain a worthless piece of paper.
And that's the key point, and I think Professor Oja has also made that point, because whether we like it or not, you need funds to actually even take care of the victims in the first place. So imagine there's nothing to take care of the victims with, and you're taking them in. How do you go about that? So as we wind down, Professor Oja, on a final note, two things that were raised earlier on, which you didn't quite get to respond to, and I'd like you to round off with that. First, on medical tourism. Mr. Aborisade believes that there should be a law, some sort of legislation to stop medical tourism, such that we can focus on our health sector locally and build it. Do you think there should be some sort of criminalization of medical tourism, first off? Professor Oja, that's for you. If you can unmute, please. Yes, you were asking to unmute.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, please go
yes.
ahead then.
Okay. What you are saying is not new to Nigerian Medical Association. Nigerian Medical Association has been actually advocating the issue of Nigerians to avoid medical tourism. We have said that several times. And how do you do that? And we even, at the moment, advocating for a health bank so that we can have functioning facilities like Apollo in India and ports in India. We have said this severally and several times that it's not for lack of knowledge, experience, and skills that people are going to Europe and America and India. It is because the basic facilities for this treatment, for the treatment or care of our people is not made available. And once we are able to strengthen our healthcare system, going abroad will become, a thing of the past. However, fundamentally, anybody has a right to go to anywhere to seek for help, for healthcare, but not at the expense of government fund. Right. You can go with his private fund, but not at the expense of government fund. So
for you,
in summary,
okay, please round off. Thank you.
Yes, in summary, I'm saying that we must strengthen our own health system. We should establish health bank. If we can have bank of industry and bank of agriculture, why can we not have bank for health? Because that will strengthen. And of course, we need to, in fact, improve and ensure that we have a compulsory health insurance scheme for healthcare financing.
Right.
And of course, other sources of funding. We will establish state-of-the-art facilities where Nigerians can be treated, just like in Apollo, in India, and forts in India too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. For Professor Oja, a blood bank is not enough. We need to have a bank for health as well. We'd like to thank you so much, Professor Innocent Oja.
No, I talked of bank for health. I said
yes,
bank
that's
for
why I
health,
said the
not
blood bank is not enough. We need
Yes.
a bank for health
No,
as
no,
well.
you're right. I agree with you. I agree with you. And I'm very happy today because a Nigerian is a president of World Medical Association.
Okay.
And this is a greater achievement under my leadership.
Well, great place to anchor, Prof. President of the Nigerian Medical Association, Professor Innocent Oja, has been speaking with us, as well as Mr. Femi Aborisade, founding member of NCP and human rights lawyer. Thank you so much for your thoughts on the show this morning, gentlemen.
Thanks so much for having me.